It's time to take command with former NFL tight end Logan Paulson and former Commanders beat reporter Craig Hoffman.
The thing I'd like to ask you, Craig, is just like, what are some differences from like an ownership standpoint, like that fans should keep an eye out for? Because like, a lot about basketball, about roster construction. Like this feels like a totally different ball of wax because you have kind of like X's and O's, you have a personnel, you have all these different things you have to handle, which are very different from like soccer, hockey, and basketball, quite frankly. So like,
Yeah. I mean, I think if I'm Harris looking at what his track record is, he likes to be on the cutting edge and he's not afraid to push things to a bit of an extreme. I mean, that was the whole deal with the process in Philadelphia, right? So people might have heard this term, and I'm sure many listeners are aware of it. So I'll try to make this as quick as possible for those that don't. The process was the idea that they were going to completely tear it down. They had a team that had kind of an average roster. They had a couple players that were very good. Drew Holiday, Andre Iguodala, I think we're still there at that time. Like very good players, but not good enough to help you win a championship. And they didn't really have a good way to get to a championship roster. Many ways what the Wizards have been. So there's your comparison. And what they did was instead of the traditional, like we just got to keep trying and hope we get lucky, it's like we're going to trade off these good pieces for parts. They don't fit our timeline to be able to win. And Holiday was young at the time. He's like 23, 24, but his ceiling was not high enough that he was going to be the best player on a championship team. And what they did was intentionally be pretty bad for a couple of years and accumulate draft picks. And ultimately they wind up with Joel Embiid, who's the reigning MVP. But I think the part of that part of it is more well known and doesn't really apply to football because you don't have to bottom out in the NFL. And that's been proven time and time again. The part that I think is interesting and will carry over is the strategy side of it. Do they find someone who's willing to say, the analytics tell us these things are best, so we're going to dive hard into that? The way they played basketball in Philadelphia was a ton of threes, a ton of free throws, very limited on long twos, which is the shots that the analytics say are the most valuable ones. And so whether it's Rivera and Bieniemy coming together and figuring out where the league is going and saying, hey, this is what the most advantageous way to play is, we're going to lead hard into it, or Harris asking ultimately what is his job. I'm going to ask tough questions. If your answers aren't good enough, I'm going to replace you. That's where he makes a difference. And I don't think Snyder knew enough to ask the right questions. That to me is where the rubber meets the road, is as he has conversations in house and watches the team play this year, does he feel like they are at least ahead of where the league is going from a strategic standpoint and a player development standpoint? And if not, then I think he ultimately makes changes and tries to find whoever that person is that's going to come up with the next thing.
Yeah, that'll be really relevant to our conversation for the last half of the show. But yeah, I think that's the interesting. That's super interesting because like it's so layered. And I'm not saying you need a tank, but obviously like next year there's going to be some good quarterbacks. Caleb Williams, probably
Sure.
the first pick overall. Like, is that something you kind of make a move for? You know what I mean? And try to get a part of that if you're this new ownership group, and talk about a way to seal a rebrand or whatever you're going to do next year. Like, gosh, getting a franchise quarterback like that cures a lot of ails. And I'm just super curious because like how they handle all that stuff. So
right. Well, it comes down defensively too, right? Like it's not just we always talk about offense, but like, are they ahead of where they need to be defensively? Like every part of the team is going to be under scrutiny, and we talked about this obviously a lot the last couple of weeks with all the play caller stuff, but like how influential were Vic Fangio and Brandon Staley and all these defensive coordinators who did funky stuff, or what previously was thought to be funky stuff, to help shut down the Shanahans, the McVays, and the McDaniels. Like, can they get one of those guys? Like that to me is the question. But then the other part of it too that he mentioned is like the sports science side. They are so behind on that because of lack of investment. They have smart people here that are good at that stuff.
Yeah.
But like, do you have the investment on the sports science side where this team has been so injured so often? Can you increase your winning by sheer availability being better? Like these are the kinds of things that are going to matter.
Yeah, I'm really curious. And, like to speaking to defensive point, like it's so funny, man. Like, Jack Del Rio is not considered like, I think perception wise, like an overly innovative guy. But when you look at what he's doing defensively, like he's kind of right there in terms of stuff that people are doing that's like pretty high level. So Like it's kind of goes against convention a little bit, but he's been pretty innovative and pretty ready to change over the last couple of years. But yeah, I agree, man. It's the sports science stuff, the everything. I'm just so super curious to see, and it's not gonna be like overnight. It's gonna take probably 2 years to figure out what they're doing. But man, like I really am curious to see how you rebuild something like this from an ownership perspective, because I think we often see, like, we see a GM come in, we see a head coach come in, and those processes are a little bit more familiar. But here it's like what do you even do, because this is such a rare thing in the NFL. So I'm really curious to see what happens. And obviously, like you look at Carolina, and they're probably the most recent example of a team sale, and I don't want to say they've botched it, but it hasn't gone great, and so making good decisions with the head coach and the leadership and the coordinators. And like you mentioned, strength staff, analytics, all that stuff is going to be super, super interesting.
I'm hopeful that Josh Harris will avoid new owner syndrome because he's not a new owner. He's a new NFL owner, but like Tepper never been in
Right,
charge of a team
right,
before.
right.
And like Mark Cuban is considered a very good owner in the NBA. Like when Cuban got to Dallas, he did so many dumb things, like terrible. He signed Rafe LaFrentz to like a 7-year max contract, and like it killed them for years. There's just like all this stuff that they did that was silly. And a lot of new owners do that, right? Tepper comes in, he's like, I know better. All these stupid NFL owners. Been waiting for my shot. I got it. I'm going to hire Matt Rule.
Yeah.
Whoops. Like, so what do you do when you get the power? And I think this is where I was really impressed with Harris, where he just seems to be very level-headed.
Yeah.
And even though he kind of did a version of this in Philadelphia, like there was strategy behind it. It wasn't like I'm doing something new and different and I'm smarter than everyone else. It's just like, hey, we all agree this is the best strategy, right? Why is no one fully going for it?
Right.
And he went for it. And so I don't think he's going to go hire some. Now, maybe I'm eating my words a year from now as we're on the verge of training camp with insert college coach here. But like, I don't think he's going to go hire some college coach to come in. Like, he understands that these are adults and that they need a certain type of coach. And, there's a professionalism that is necessary in the franchise. And I also think someone like Magic is super helpful there. Like Magic's main role, Magic said this, is going to be in the community, right? He's already done a ton of business in DC. There's, movie theaters he's opened, he's been in other types of, whether it's philanthropy or business dealings in the DC area. And so there's connections he has that are super helpful. But like, if they go to hire a dumb coach and Magic's like, look, man, like this ain't it. Then that guy's probably not getting hired. And so I think that that is also good in terms of some of the, let's call it the fail safes, some of the barriers that are in place with the diversity in this ownership group, in terms of having a strong number or a strong influence from a small but not overly limited number of people, if that makes sense.
And even in like the what is that, what's the name of the podcast, Jordan Rodriguez, the signal, no,
The play callers,
like they talked about the hiring process for like Sean McVay, and it was so different than what I expected. I thought it would be like this super kind of well organized, but it's like, oh, like the owner really likes what this guy's got to say, so we had to sell him, and it was like Marshall Faulk, remember? And like, I don't know, just like, can you eliminate some of that stuff and kind of make
but
sure
that stuff happens, and right?
I know it does.
The thing is, though, like if it's Marshall Faulk and Marshall Faulk's judgment is excellent, then that works. And if it's Marshall Faulk is terrible at this, then it doesn't work. Like sometimes that's it. It's not like, of course, it's always the process of it, no pun intended, but like it's also the who in the process. And I would trust, even for an NFL head coach, I would trust Magic Johnson's judgment on key parts of that, because Magic has done nothing but win his entire life. And so there's I think that some of the people they have in place, their BS detectors are high, their track records are strong. And those are good guardrails to have. Now you still have to get the football side right. And that's the hardest part, because who do you trust that has like a good football acumen? Who is the Marshall Faulk that becomes the confidant of Josh Harris, that is the really smart, innovative football brain that can help lead you to the right place? Or are you hiring a search firm, or however you go about it?
Again, that'll be interesting.
Those are tough questions that I think are down the road, obviously, because they are going to stick with who they have right now, and that we shouldn't get too far ahead of that either.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. And that's another one of those interesting pieces in the process. Like, there's so many things that are going to happen. And like, I just can't wait to see, because again, it's so familiar. New GM, this is what we do, right? We accrue draft picks, we build through the draft, whatever. Head coach, like, we bring in an innovative offensive philosophy. That seems to be the way to go. Ownership, I haven't seen a successful owner transition in a while, so I'm hoping that this group can get that done and give us a really solid data point. So really looking forward to it.
Yeah. One of the things that I think would be interesting is talking to some of the other teams in town. Now, I don't know how much the Wizards are going to want to talk to Josh Harris because he owns the Sixers. But like the Wizards are going through this a little bit with the
I
new
like this
GM and
idea.
president
This
they
is very good.
have of like, yeah, it turns out you guys are super behind. And like that's Ted had a willingness to spend. I don't think the people in charge were up enough to know what to spend on.
Right.
And so now Will Dawkins and Michael Winger come in, to people that helped build the Oklahoma City Thunder into the premier organization when it comes to infrastructure in the entire NBA. The Clippers are also right there, who Winger helped build after he left Oklahoma City. That's part of the reason he got hired there. So now they come to DC and they're like, yeah, this practice facility that you were super proud of is actually not that cool. And so there's things like that that are happening behind the scenes. And I think picking the brain of other teams in town could be smart. The Washington Spirit, same thing. They go through an ownership change, and they have done more hiring by percentage than I think probably it has to be the highest in professional sports. Like the way they've turned over their franchise and brought in someone like Don Scott, who is the premier like strength and conditioning coach in the women's soccer world. Like they hired her and let her hire a staff. So like what does the NFL version of that look like? Because there just aren't a lot of roadmaps with NFL teams, because most NFL teams have been spending bukus of money and are on the cutting edge already, while this team has been left behind. So, between getting people from other organizations that have done it well, picking the brains of people in other sports in and out of town, how do you ultimately build the optimized plan moving forward? That's what this organization has to figure out. They got to figure out who the right people are to run it. But it definitely seems like Josh Harris understands that. And those are the types of things he's thinking about over the next year, on top of some of the other, the name and the branding and the stadium. They've obviously got to figure out all of that kind of stuff.
Totally agree.
Thanks for watching this clip of Take Command. First, why don't you like it? It lets other people know that it was good, and then they should watch it too. And Logan, we have a new exclusive home for full episodes.
We do. 1067 The Fans YouTube page. Go check it out and please subscribe.
Yeah, do what Logan said.
Do
He's
it.
Very, very smart.